Good morning, all, or happy lunchtime for my friends in Southdowns and the rest of you living in the future. And welcome to Kalbardr's Corner for this episode of Coffee with Kal. I am Lord Kalbardr Gellir, Companion of the Meridian Cross, Companion of the Argent Comet, Companion of the Compostela, and Reaper, coming to you live, as always, from the Barony of the Osprey on the southern coast of Meridies. Now, for this episode, I am joined by one of the hosts between two peers, or one of the what do you guys say, the original Broadway recording cast? And of course, a frequent guest of the Corner Tavern, Magnifica Tulia Alori. Good morning, Your Excellency.
Thank you. Hi. Glad to be here.
So if you will, for those new to the channel, and for those who maybe haven't watched Between Two Peers, which if you haven't, go check that out. There's plenty of content out there. It's an amazing show. Tell us a little bit who you are and why you're amazing.
Well, I'm a Laurel from the West Kingdom. I'm also a court baroness. I'm also a giant pain in the ass. And and I'm going to be real, like really real today, because I have had like 3 hours of sleep and I've got all of this coffee right here to finish. So let's have fun.
Brought the big guns for the coffee today. All right, so speaking of coffee, as today's show is coffee themed, let's talk about that.
Okay.
So I recently placed my very first order with Odyssey Coffee. Anybody who's been around the SCA for very long knows about them. So today I'm enjoying the Highlander Grog, which is a taste from the Highlands of Scotland. Butterscotch, caramel, and rum among the flavor notes.
Nice.
It's tasty. And of course, out of my Feed the Ravens mug. So support your local vendors and merchants. Do that. What about you, Tulia? What are you drinking?
I am drinking Phil's Coffee Filtered Soul. So I know Phil's, I think it's just kind of Bay Area, Northern California local coffee chain. And they have a fantastic brew, which is called Filtered Soul. That's PHIL.
Of course.
Yeah. And it tastes like chocolate and just deliciousness. I put a tiny amount of peppermint essence in it, so it's sort of this chocolate pepperminty coffee flavored. It's totally my new obsession, and I am drinking out of a custom mug by Renegtane, and it says in Latin, it's a play on the those coffee mugs that are like, do not approach, you may approach, we can talk now. Yeah. It basically says that in Latin. It's the first is something like go away. The second level is you may approach with caution. And the third level is we can talk now, So, and it's giant, so it holds a lot.
That's amazing. Now I need a new coffee mug. Clearly, I need to upgrade.
They do custom, beautiful work. They are actually former apprentices of mine, and I'm very, very proud of them. And yeah, they're killing it right now with their production during COVID. Actually, it's really cool to watch what they've been doing. So
everybody's had time to do new stuff. So they're like, well, we've got time to make new pots, I guess. So
yeah, they make they're a mother and daughter team of potters. One throws, the other paints, and they both design and research, and they do incredible work. So Renegtane, and we can throw a link out there. I'm all about.
I'll get that here. I'll get this one out first, and then yeah, I know. I always love when you guys had their commercial on your show. Watching doing the speed painting of one of their things. That was always a cool commercial to watch. That was one of my favorite ones y'all had. So
yeah.
So all right. So now that we've plugged all of our merchants and talked about our coffee, let's talk about why you didn't get any sleep last night. So the impact of social media on the society.
Yeah.
So first of all, I want to start off with this is a non-SCA, non-official publication. So whereas Tulia is the current Kingdom social media officer for the West Kingdom, today we'll be speaking in totally unofficial capacities. So this is our opinion. Anything we say that may be wrong or doesn't jive with the policies, the policy is the way to go. Mm-hmm. But we will be giving our opinions on some of that and talking about how we feel about policies or procedures and things that have happened. And we did get sort of an unofficial blessing from the Kingdom or the Society social media officer to sort of talk about that. So just throwing that out there. So let's dive into that. Social media is a weird thing. So how long have you dealt with social media within the society? What's your background with it?
Okay, within the society or outside the society? Because I have had in the past a background in social media management for nonprofits. A very large. What's that?
So let's go with both. So
okay.
give your background.
that's my professional background was in social media for a while before I switched to law. And they, having run social media for a very, very large nonprofit, which the SCA arguably could also apply there, it was a much more tightly controlled environment. But it gave me a lot of sort of insight. So when I was sort of voluntold to do this role a couple of years ago, they were looking, our former seneschal was looking for a replacement. So she came to me and she said, hey, you do this you've done this for a living. This will be an easy job for you. Basically just babysit Facebook, and it's all going to be fine. It's just, it's a pretty chill job. And I'm like, okay, that does sound like a pretty chill job. And then COVID happened.
It was a trap. Yeah.
Well, that's how the best things happen, is when your friends come to you and they're like, this is perfect for you because it's very, laid back. You're not going to have to do a lot of work. It's going to be just occasionally checking in and making sure people are being nice to each other online and all of that. And then suddenly something like a global pandemic happens. And you go from nice, chill job where you're just basically like, hey, kids, play nice every so often. And suddenly your entire world is upended and everybody has to interact online. So now you've become sort of the facilitator of all of these all of these discussions. And the only way that we can interact with each other right now, primarily, is through Facebook, mostly because Facebook is now the Society's approved communication channel. Most of us are on it, so it's kind of, natural that it became that way. But it wasn't always that way. So a lot of the social media stuff that's going on, and we can get into this a little bit more, I'm sure, is these social media policies are sort of being worked backwards, because for a long time the SCA didn't have any sort of social media official presence whatsoever. So now that the SCA has kind of, SCA Inc. has caught up to the 21st century, they're realizing that, oh crap, we need to get all of these new, all of these policies in order, because we just didn't have them. We sort of had ad hoc rules about just being nice online, don't be a dick, like that kind of stuff, which the policy really kind of just boils down to, honestly, to don't be a dick. Right. It uses a lot more words, and I think that confuses some people, but yeah. So why I was up in the middle of the night last night was because, of course, something sort of blew up. With the reopening of the SCA, there's a lot of feelings about how that should happen, how strict we should be, whether or not we should be looking at vaccination status, whether or not we should be having attendance caps, whether or not we should be mandating masks in areas where they're not mandated, that kind of stuff. So people have all of these very big opinions about them and very big feelings about that. And that kind of came to a head on my kingdom's Facebook page yesterday. Normally the West Kingdom is pretty chill, surprisingly chill when it comes to social media. But I've seen some other kingdom social media pages that are just every little thing just blows up into a giant, crazy thing. But this one got a little heated. There were some people that kind of stepped out of line and needed to be reeled back in. Right now, so yeah, that's kind of where I was. Middle of the night, I roll over to 10 messages, you've got to do something, from all sides, actually coming at me and asking me to do something about whatever it was that was going on. So yeah, it goes from almost nothing to sudden explosion of activity. And that was last night, but not to be unexpected, honestly, because we are reopening. We're trying to figure out how to do that. We're trying to figure out what our personal boundaries are with coming back into events versus what, other people's personal boundaries are. And there's a lot of feelings.
There are lots of feelings. It's just sort of overall.
Feelings.
And that's so it's funny because, like, you never, as an exchequer or as an MOC or as a herald, I never get a call at 2 o'clock in the morning going, "Oh my God, my device isn't passing." Like, that never happens. That's never gonna happen. And if it ever does, somebody's gonna get slapped.
Yeah.
That's not an emergency. Unfortunately, social media, because it is a 24/7, 365 platform, that becomes a 365 job.
Yeah.
So let's look back a year and a half ago, before the pandemic. There was never 2 o'clock. Yeah, you may have the occasional person up at 2 o'clock in the morning, but it's going to be a single post. It's going to be a single comment that you can deal with in the morning. It was never a big deal. Now it's become a big thing. And so you said a minute ago that, the SCA went into this pandemic without the policies, right? Because social media was such a small part of what we did.
Yeah.
They never considered it.
That is not entirely correct, because we did have a social media policy. We just hadn't actually, there was a previous social media policy that was published. This current update, this is really just an update on the existing policy that we've had for probably 4 or 5 years, and we've been working fine under. But this just, because the lawyers want to be lawyers and cover everybody's asses as much as possible, had to be completely, kind of overhauled to update the language and to incorporate some different, some policies that have gone through in the last 4 years about what bullying or harassment looks like online and how to deal with that. And so there was some updating, I think, really is right. More accurate to say what it is. But prior to that, there really wasn't anything. There was kind of this, it was sort of wild, wild west, free for all. And individual pages, Facebook pages or groups really were unofficial. Everybody had an unofficial group because the SCA Inc. did not recognize the platform as an official form of communication until much, much more recently. So we're talking probably in the last 3-4 years. We started to see these kingdom pages, and many people watching this probably remember seeing kingdom pages that were it would say something like West Kingdom unofficial group, or discussion group or something like that. And there's still a few that are out there. But that was because the original mandate from society had been that any sort of group on Facebook was just not an official communication platform. So any information that was put out there had to be kind of stated that this was unofficial. and then slowly it just started coming back into, when the SCA kind of caught up to the idea that, Facebook is here to stay. Most people are on it. Yahoo groups got killed a couple of years ago. So West Kingdom had a long history on the Yahoo groups. And once Facebook took over, that kind of dwindled, and then Yahoo killed the groups. And so now Facebook is pretty much it. So if you're not on Facebook, you're probably not getting, or you're having a harder time anyway, getting information or discussion with your peers, your small p peers, about anything going on in the SCA. And I find that pretty unfortunate, because I think Facebook is inherently flawed. so that's it. While it makes it convenient, it puts everybody in one place, it's not, we could do better, I think, in terms of our communication, but right now this is what we're using. So
right. Well, you have to look at it. Facebook as a tool, right? So whether you're using Facebook or you're using Zoom or you're using Google Meet or using whatever thing you're using to do a job. I mean, if you go to build a shelf in your garage and you try to use a sledgehammer, that's not the right tool for the job, right? Yeah, you could probably get by nailing it with the sledgehammer, but it ain't going to be the best thing. So unfortunately, Facebook right now is the best thing we have out of all the social media platforms that exist to do everything we need to do. Yeah. People talk about doing things like TikTok and Instagram and all those things. Yeah, they have their uses, and they're good for the things they do. Facebook is an organizing and social networking platform, and it works for getting people together and sort of having those discussions. Whereas, it's really hard to have a discussion on TikTok. It just doesn't. And let me say this, and Runa, I know you're watching. I'm still grumpy with you about this. I'm on TikTok now, and I don't like it. I'm not happy about it. I'm there.
Well, and you bring up a good point, actually. Yeah. Actually, you do bring up a really good point about that, because shifting forms of communication has always been a problem with social media since day one. Social media, we think of social media as something that happened when Facebook became a thing. And there were earlier forms of it. Of course, MySpace is a good example. LiveJournal is a good example. Reddit. These are all kind of forms of online communication that Facebook, for good or for ill, streamlined all of it.
Right.
That's
you got it all in one place.
Yeah, that's the genius of Facebook, and also the absolute evil of Facebook is that it took all these different modes of communication and just put them all into one thing. And so people are like, oh, I can chat. I can do video chat through Facebook. I can do, Instagram is now linked. So we can incorporate Instagram posts and, so it's not just written forms of communication. And before it primarily was written forms of communication. So now we're looking at, the future. And this was an issue when I was working in social media in my mundane life. We were trying to find ways of getting past the Facebook barrier, because Facebook now, as a geriatric millennial / zennial, the kids are no longer on Facebook. The kids haven't been on Facebook for about 10 years. Like when I was working mundanely in social media, and this was in 2013, 2014, we were trying to figure out ways to create engagement with youth at the time. Because they weren't on Facebook. They had moved away from that. And they were doing, at that point, it was Snapchat. Snapchat was the huge deal. And of course, now Snapchat's it's still used. People are still on it, but it's not. TikTok has kind of taken that place. So there's always going to be a new emerging technology that we're going to have to catch up to if we want to engage the kids or the youths or the young people. And the SCA, of course, has a really, really historically, at least in the last 20 years or so, historically a very terrible outreach to young people. So we are branching into TikTok. We do have a very active Instagram, which is still a little bit older generation and primarily female. And TikTok, though, is, it is where the kids are these days. And once events start, I think we're going to start seeing a lot more use out of TikTok. Now, me being my geriatric millennial / zennial self, I also kind of cringe at TikTok personally. But, we got to go where the people are. We got to go. And if we want to attract people of a specific demographic, we should go where they are. And yeah, right now that's TikTok. And then in another year or so, it's probably going to be something else entirely different. And we got to always try to be keeping up with it. So.
Right. So we also look at the differences in the two, though, right? So I think Facebook in itself, because Facebook is a platform of tools. So again, if you look at the Google suite, right? Within Google, you have Gmail and you have Meets and you have Drive and you have all these different pieces, that you can use for different stuff. The Google suite as a whole is a tool set. Facebook has become a tool set more than a marketing platform. Right? It's built as a marketing platform. But we have our groups for organizing. We have file structures in there. We have ability to do meetings. We have ability to do announcements, and you have your page for doing your advertising. You have your group for doing your discussions. So we need to treat it like that. But then also from an advertising perspective, you look out to things like TikTok and Instagram and the other things, and that's where the social media team needs to be able to focus on. And so to go back to that, so again, so a year and a half ago, social media was a person doing this job, hanging out, whatever, click, I'm done for a day. Now it's become it's a thing, right? So not only do we need a social media policy, we need social media procedures and handbook. So if we look at the marshallet, right? The marshallet has pages upon pages upon pages of rules that get updated regularly whenever something happens.
Right.
We don't necessarily have that for social media. We just now sort of got a revamped policy that's the legalese of the policy. I think something we've missed out on, something that Meridia's did just before the pandemic, they were starting to work towards, was a sort of a procedures and guidelines and instructions for social media officers and how we handle things. Because you look at a policy, that's great. That's the legal thing that protects us when we get sued. That's all policies do, folks. Let's be honest here. That's all policies are for. They're not necessarily directions for us as the common man on the ground doing work. So you have to sort of interpret a lot of that. So you're right. I think the policy says basically don't be a dick. And if you are a dick and you are connected to the SCA at all, we can punish you for that. Right? I know all.
I want to take a moment though to address the punishment part of it, because it's really not a punishment.
Right.
And that's, I think, a big misunderstanding that people had when policy came out with all of the words, all the words. It was a lot of words, and people saw a lot of words. And I know I have a processing disorder. I have ADHD with a whole heap of issues that go along with it. And I know that when I see like a big block of text, I go, overwhelmed, can't, have to really sit and try and parse it out, especially when it's written in sort of legalese. The social media policy really isn't, but there's a lot of whereases, stuck in there, very bored language. And so I think people took that, so suddenly being confronted with all of this information, and presented in a CYA, a cover your ass sort of way, which, that's what this is. Took that and sort of panicked because they were worried that now social media officers are going to be coming after everybody who's mean online, or people can abuse the system and lodge complaints against somebody that are specious. And my answer to that is that's been happening the whole time. That actually has been happening the whole time. People have been coming to social media officers and saying, so-and-so was mean to me online, do something. And that didn't change anything. That for us, those of us behind the scenes doing all of this work. But what really I think people got afraid of is that what's this punishment? What is going to be the punishment if somebody steps out of line and you have like some, just some person who gets to decide if this, individual is bullying and harassing, and that's the only person. That's usually, the social media officer. Well, what it is actually social media officers will identify a situation that could be problematic, some behavior that is not just, being nice online, and step in and give a warning. Really what we do is we're that warning, which again, this has been happening the whole time, stepping in and saying, hey, can you keep this conversation civil? And if they can't, well, past that, screenshots, always get screenshots because it's useful if somebody is actually behaving poorly online, because people like to delete, and then escalate up the chain of command. And escalating usually means bringing it to the seneschal, the kingdom seneschal's attention. Now, the seneschal can and always has been able to mete out any sort of punishment that needs to happen for truly egregious behavior. We're talking like really bad behavior. We're not talking about like, Lord so-and-so called mistress whatever ninny, which is honestly like the majority. You boil it down, the essence of arguments online kind of boils down to that. We're talking like this is somebody on a campaign of harassment, somebody who is, actively stalking somebody or online doxing them, which doxing, another thing that people are confused about, that's literally publishing, identifying information like address, phone number, voting records, things like that. About
private, those things. If you publish it yourself on your own Facebook, then it's no longer private. Yeah.
Right. And so that's the other thing too, is it's not really doxing, say, if you have a Facebook page or your Facebook page, say, has your email address and your phone number attached to it that anybody can see. And then somebody is like, oh, you can see this information. That's still shitty, but it's not necessarily doxing because you put that information out there for everyone to see it. So yeah, doxing is kind of a next level, like digging shit up on somebody. Like, nobody knows what my address is, but if somebody wanted to dox me, they could probably figure it out and then publish it online and say like, everybody, go pee on Tulia's front lawn. So like, that's really, really.
I'm sure Thorfinn does that enough already. You don't need help.
Exactly.
Fair.
Oh my God, the neighbors would complain. But yeah, so it is all of this sort of behavior that has to reach like a very, very, very significant level of assholery for people to, or for anyone to really get more than just a finger wag at them. So yeah, and I think that idea that social media officers are now going to be punishing people or banning people or getting people R&D, like that's That is not our job. That is way above our pay grade.
Yeah.
And we don't really want to do that anyway. We don't want any part of this.
I think at that point, the most you would do would be to mute somebody or block somebody for a period of time until somebody else, the Kingdom Seneschal, could come in and look at it.
Yeah, exactly. Putting people in timeout, like you get a 24-hour timeout. You can't post on the Kingdom page until you calm down. I've had that happen to me. So I am not somebody who is, innocent in all of the ways that people can be dicks to each other online. Trust me. But we do try really hard to de-escalate, to, remind people of rule number 1, don't be a dick. That behavior is harder online because it's text-based. You may not think you're being aggressive, but somebody else may look at what you've been writing and go, oh my God, he's completely out of line and yelling at me. And I feel very attacked, Yeah. And I know language is hard. Yeah.
I'm a very logical person. And when I type, it's very factual, logical, and it's very staccatoed apparently. And I guess from what I've been told, that especially when I'm dealing with the issues, I sound very aggressive. Yeah. So I'm very familiar with what, why are you yelling at me? I'm like, what? Who's yelling? Nobody's yelling. I'm like, I'm not yelling. But I have the same problem in person too, because I'm 6'5" and very loud. So this is not a problem for me. So social media officers are not out there meting out punishments. That is still in the purview of the Seneschalate. That is their job to do investigations, and those policies have not. They have changed or sort of been refined. But that's a separate policy, right? I know all the social media policy really does is sort of define what is and isn't official. I think that's the biggest difference from what I noticed. This one of the scary parts for me when I first saw it, right, was the what defined an official connection to the SCA.
Yeah. Okay.
That was my giant trigger. I was like, oh shit. And I even stepped back and went, okay, let's look at this for a second. Yeah. I don't care, right? I have no problems. I am very honest, but I try to be very polite. Mm-hmm. I started this channel with the understanding of this was a separate from the SCA, but I've been very public about my connection to the SCA and who I am within the SCA. And so there is obviously a connection to the SCA, but I made it very clear that this is an unofficial platform so that I don't have to follow any of the social media policies. I did that on purpose. Mm-hmm. But now I can be punished within the SCA per that policy, right? So if I'm a dick over here and I'm over here putting out death threats to Kingdom peers, the SCA can go, well, hey, you're kind of being a dick and you're connected to the SCA, therefore we're going to remove you because you're being a dick. Yeah. That's the biggest difference. Mm-hmm. We saw this come up in Meridia's, and I won't speak to the exact incident or to anything that happened from it. We had basically some peers were being really terrible people. Yeah. And the SCA tried to do something about it and went, well, technically they're not at events. And it wasn't part of an official discussion. It was on their own private pages, and they didn't actually do anything at an SCA event. They went, well, sorry, right? Mm-hmm. I think this policy sort of fixes that loophole, I guess, of allowing them to then be, well, no, you're still a dick and you're connected to the SCA, therefore you're no longer part of this organization.
And I think we saw this actually in other kingdoms as well, right around the same time. I think that you're talking, well, maybe a little bit.
There were 3 large incidents.
Yeah, they were all kind of back-to-back situations, especially in the run-up to the election. And that was one of the things that the social media teams were on high alert about, because people were finding it difficult to maintain a separate category of, what we discuss on official Kingdom pages versus what we post to our own Facebook, about our opinions about politics, mundane politics. And there became this permeability to it. And I am not the sort of person that's going to say leave politics at the gate, because I do think that and anyone who's watched Between Two Peers will know that I have very strong opinions about, mundane politics definitely inform how we behave in the SCA as well as outside of it. So, just to say let's just pretend that none of that exists is really silencing to a lot of people who are affected a lot on a much deeper level by mundane politics and society when they come into the SCA and start to experience microaggressions or variations of this marginalization behavior. So we were seeing a lot more of this happening around the election, and there were some very specific incidents that were quite widely publicized at the time, and threats of violence against people, saying, yeah, I have no problem showing up in an event and just, opening fire on anybody who doesn't agree with me politically. That's not something you as a peer want to be doing on your public Facebook page. So yeah, this social media policy definitely tightens that up with the language, because it allows for us now to say, well, if you represent yourself as an official voice or an attached official in some way to the SCA, peer, if you identify yourself as a peer, and this honestly should be like kind of number one thing anyway for everybody who is a peer or hoping to become one, which is your behavior every single day with anybody else watching in any sort of way has to become, or will become, exemplar of your peerage. So it's, be good, be nice, do your best to be your best self. And we all fall down and we all have like shitty days. Absolutely. Like I kind of had one yesterday, but at the same time, realize though that you are a representative of the SCA. And so that's why that social media policy makes the distinction of like peers being considered an official representative of the SCA, because we are. And it's sort of funny to me that people didn't really like take that to heart until they saw the language and realized that there could be repercussions for shitty behavior online. And then suddenly it was, oh no, there was all this panic about it. And then the whole time I'm sitting there like, yeah, but this is the advice we give, vigilance. Like while they're sitting vigil to be elevated. Like this is literally kind of an extension of that. So it can help to think of it that way. But yeah, it certainly is giving us now a framework for sanctioning egregiously bad behavior on social media. The confusion about what constitutes an official voice of the SCA, I do think that the language can be cleaned up a little bit more, but this is an evolving process. Now, this is the other part too, which is, yes, this is a policy that is enacted, but it is going to be revised. It will. It's a living document.
Policy always should be.
Right. And so we are going to probably find in the next month, a couple of months to a year, there may be an additional update to it that will, fix some of these issues. I'm getting text messages now and I'm like, oh geez. Okay. No, just people checking in.
Oh God, Tulia has opinions. Let's message her quick. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I'm just like, oh God, what did I just say? Nope, everything's fine. But yeah, it is. I actually liked that part of the policy a lot, because it did firm up a lot of the ambiguity about how we conduct ourselves online when we identify as, working at the Kingdom of the West. Like I see a lot of people in their Facebook, profiles say works at Kingdom of whatever or works for SCA. And if you're going to put that in your profile online, you probably should realize that people are going to see you as an official representative of the SCA in some form or another, and you can be held accountable by the SCA for it. So, and I'm not saying that just simply taking that out of your profile is going to fix everything and make you A-okay to be a dick online, because it's not. but yeah.
But if you look at if you were a member of a church or like the YMCA or any other organization, and you had member of YMCA, Saraland on your Facebook page, and then we're off being a dick, I guarantee you that YMCA branch would call you and be like, hey, stop being a dick or we're going to kick you out. Like, you don't get to come play with us anymore because you're being a dick. This is not a thing that's unique to the SCA, right? We are an organization that is, and this is a thing that I will separate too. So the SCA Incorporated, their job is to protect the SCA Incorporated and make sure that branding and that organization exists tomorrow. Right now, unfortunately, that also means that it's not always their primary job is that. Their secondary job is to protect the membership, right? So them protecting you as an individual is not their primary focus. That is unfortunate, but it's sort of the matter of the thing, They have to protect the big picture. We, the organization, the people, protect the little picture. We protect the rest of it, right? So that's something we can do as social media officers, as as peers, as members of this society. We're policing our own to make sure that we have a game to play tomorrow, while the bear killers and the folks in the giant office protect to make sure we have the legal backing to play tomorrow. That's it's separate jobs, right? So this policy came out as a way for them to do that, and we're going to figure out how to manage it on this side so we can do the same thing.
Yeah.
And talking about policy is changing, right? Anybody who's ever worked in any corporate environment or in any kind of industrial environment, something like that, policies changes, things happen as new information is found out, and it's never going to be perfect. And you have to remember that it's much better to have a policy out there, realize it's wrong, and then fix it, and then fix it, and then fix it, than to spend an extra 6 months or an extra year, an extra 3 years getting a policy out in the first place, right?
Yeah.
You have to have something to start with, and this is now. Yeah, you're right. We had a social media policy before; it was there. Nobody knew it existed. It was very in the background. We now have one. It's now very public.
Yeah.
We have a starting point, right? And we're going to work from that. And
I actually saw Runa commented, had a really good comment that it's kind of interesting that the assumption that everything you say and do online is attached to your real world character wasn't something I had to be told. Generational difference? Yeah, I think so. Absolutely. Like those of us who have grown up active online I know my first experience online incidentally was the same year I joined the SCA. It was 1993. It was AOL. But you learned very early on in those early interactions that, behavior is attached to who you are or who you're perceived to be even in a virtual space. So yeah, I don't know necessarily if and I say my generation, I'm in a very weird generational gap. I'm part Gen X, part millennial, Zennial generation. What is it? There's another term for it, but I really love. Oh yeah, Oregon Trail.
Yeah, the Oregon Trail.
Yeah, the Oregon Trail. But it is that situation where I grew up in a world where there still wasn't the internet. I can remember pre-internet days, but then very, very early on, I also was introduced to technology. I also, I was 5 years old and I was learning how to use a computer in 1983, so I've had technology like computers and the internet and various forms of, this just constantly evolving technologically dense existence in my life almost the entire time I've been alive. So for me to look at something like the social media policy, it doesn't seem like it's mind-blowingly out of line because these are very rudimentary guidelines that you look at, say, the Girl Scouts of America's social media policy. It is far, far more expensive, far more narrowly focused. You look at any social media policy for pretty much any business, any corporation that I know that when I was working in nonprofit, not the SCA, but my previous nonprofit experience, I had to sign a social media policy agreement that was incredibly restrictive about how I comported myself off duty at 6 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next day mattered just as much. My behavior online mattered just as much to my job as when I was on the clock 8 a.m. to 6 p.m. during the workday. So, a lot of people don't I think they don't realize that what they're signing when they sign or they agree to these terms with companies that have these policies, but they are far more restrictive and actually far-reaching than the SCA's. So it might be an interesting project for those who are curious about it to look up different nonprofit organizations' social media policies and see how they compare. And we're not making anybody sign it. We're not making anyone agree to it. We're just saying we all want to agree that this set of behaviors is how we're going to conduct ourselves online. And again, I think that this has been sort of basically established for years. And again, it just boils down to don't be a dick. And if you're being a dick and someone steps in and says, hey, you're being a dick, de-escalate the situation, maybe apologize, maybe be like, I'm going to take a couple of days away from Facebook so I can reorient myself and before I dive back in. And it's not going to 99.999% of the time, it's not going to result in an R&D. It's going to just be a, hey, be nice. That's as bad as it's going to get for the vast majority of interactions online. There's my soapbox stepping off.
You're correct. So Furious brought up a good point too. So there's actually two things to consider this as well. Mm-hmm. Membership in the XCA is not a right. Yeah. It is not a right. This is a private organization that you don't have a right to be a part of. Mm-hmm. We appreciate you, and speaking to all of you out there, we appreciate you being a member of this organization, and we want all of you to be a member of this organization until you're a dick and we don't want to hang out with you anymore. Right. So if you use social media to be a bully, it's the same thing as if you're a bully at an event. We don't want you to be there. We don't want you to be part of the social media thing. And you, as a member of this organization, and representing this, even as a private, just a Lord such and such nobody, you're still a member of this organization, and you still reflect poorly or positively on the organization. Yeah, that's step one. Step two of this is, we also have to remember that Facebook is a private organization. Mm-hmm. That we, as the SCA, and as members of the SCA, have nothing to do with the management of. And they have their own terms of use and other things that they have that they can do or not do, that we have to follow, one, and have to help administer so that the SCA doesn't get in trouble. Because I think the last thing that we want is somebody being breaking the rules in the Kingdom group, and the Kingdom group getting shut down. Because that can happen. So yeah, and again, you also have no right to use Facebook. Facebook is not it's not an American right. There's nowhere in the Constitution to say you have the right to use Facebook. Yeah. But and that's
also, I mean, we can get into like all sorts of fun discussions about like free speech and how that's impacted by, the First Amendment doesn't actually let you use any platform and be like, a complete asshole on it without repercussions. Sure, you can be a complete asshole. That's your right as a First Amendment, in the First Amendment, enshrined in the First Amendment, your right to be an asshole, but it does not protect you from repercussions of that behavior. Right. And the repercussions can be things like you get kicked off the platform because you violate the terms of service. Or in our immediate situation in the SCA, sure, no one's gonna like force you to be nice if we can't like appeal to your better self. If you're just like, no, pew pew, I'm gonna be a dick. Like, okay, but the repercussions are gonna be that you're probably not gonna be invited to join in on discussions online. Right. So, but like I said, that's incredibly rare. I can think of maybe like one or two instances in the entire time I've been in the SCA where it has been that egregious and that bald-faced. Most of the time, it's just, like I said, very low level, people disagreeing with each other, people misinterpreting text, because they hear it differently in their head than the person writing it intended it to be. And then just, taking a breather can completely de-escalate the situation. Everybody moves on, maybe apologies are made because that's cool. Apologies rock. I am the queen of apologies.
Sometimes you have to do it. Yeah.
Written a fair few in my life because, you get tunnel vision online. The whole thing becomes very blown up in this very abstract terms. And to reel yourself back, to walk back from an interaction online that is going completely sideways, you've got to really be able to just take a giant step back. And I'm a big fan of actually deleting my Facebook app off my phone when it gets to that point, because at least it forces me not to simply constantly be checking or poking the bear. Doesn't help. So.
Yeah. So going back to the generational difference that was mentioned earlier, I think the biggest thing that I've seen in what's changed in the last sort of year and a half, right, is there was a level of anonymity. Mm-hmm. So 10 years ago on the internet, you were a screen name online that nobody really knew who was behind that screen name, unless you had a website that showed your face or showed your personal or who you were, and even then, who knows if it was right or not? You could make that it was easy. Yeah. It's a lot harder to fake a Facebook. It's a lot harder to fake an entire social media presence. so people have sort of gotten comfortable with that level of anonymity, especially people who have an only SCA Facebook, or or they have their SCA and their regular separate, and they just have their shield up and no picture of their face. Oh yeah, it's really easy to be a dick when it's just you and a shield online.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot harder to be a dick when you're, this is me, this is also where I work, and this is where, here's my mother.
Yeah.
I know that's something I love seeing the when random person gets a dick pic and they just send it to that person's mother. Here you go. Here, mom. Here's what your son's doing. That's the best for me. Dude,
yeah, I love those.
Like that is the best retribution. My mother would beat me.
Yeah, honestly, I mean, if you're not going to send something you would send your mother, then don't send it online. Though, if you do have that really weird relationship, you need some therapy.
That's a discussion. That's a different topic. So I think that level of anonymity is what caused that, and we're now, especially within this last year and a half of the SCA, that anonymity went away.
Oh yeah,
because there was no separation between Kal-bardr at the event and Richard at the house. Mm-hmm. They're now the same person. Now, for me, they're always the same person.
Yeah.
But what we're noticing now is a lot of those people in the SCA that were Lord High and Mighty or Sir Amazing Glimmering Knight was actually Sir Shithead at the house.
Yeah.
And we didn't know that because we were only seeing the facade that was put on at the event behind that white belt, behind that shiny breastplate. We weren't seeing the what he did on a day-to-day basis or what they did on a day-to-day basis. And we now see all of that. Mm-hmm. Nothing's changed. We're just now be able to notice that stuff.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, I have to bring this up. Yes, my mother would in fact beat me with my own crutch. Yes, that happened. That is a story for another day. I was a terrible youth. Let me just say that.
We all have our moments, and it's an evolutionary process. Like it really is. Like me, Tulia 15 years ago was a vastly different person. A lot of therapy helps.
Get therapy.
Yeah,
if you don't think you need therapy, you need therapy.
Well, I know, and of course that we can, access to therapy is something that is very hard to get for a lot of people. I get this, and but just always fall back to rule number 1: don't be a dick. And if you accidentally become a dick, then just apologize, take a step back, take some breaths. And I'm telling this to myself too. Don't think that I'm not. Yeah, just do some breathing. Let's take a step back. Like realize that whatever it is probably not like the end of the universe, world ending sort of a situation. So,
all right. So the other thing that I wanted to talk to you, and this is we're going to stick around the social media policy because it's an easy way to sort of segment the conversation here. The other thing I saw was people were concerned that it would be used by the bad guys.
Yeah.
Against them in the future, right? So I think, currently our current social media team and our current board of directors are all good people that are out for the betterment of the SCA. From what I know of them, I think I trust I can say that.
Yeah.
In a year, in 2 years, in 5 years, that may not be the case. We may have those Duke and Sir shitheads on that board that are trying to then hurt the good people.
Right.
That's a concern, and you know what? You're absolutely correct. Any policy can be used as a weapon. You're absolutely correct. I think my response to that, and I'm curious to hear yours as well, is that at that point, that's no longer an organization I want to be a part of.
Yeah.
If that's where the organization's going, okay, fine, I'll leave. If you want me to leave that much, and the people running it don't want me there, I'll leave. I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think that the nature of boards of directors, and this is another thing maybe people aren't familiar with because, we always hear about board of directors in a very abstract sense, but having worked closely with previous, not just in the SCA, but, outside in the other nonprofit that I was working for, having worked with boards of directors, they tend to be, it's a committee. And so honestly, you don't get as much done as you think you will in a committee. They are just painfully slow at change. But one of the benefits of that is that it tends to temper any sort of like megalomaniac activity that can get out of hand. So we could be worried about some asshole that ends up on the board and then just gets somehow or another is able to get all of his asshole buddies on the board with him, which I don't think actually is a thing that can happen with the way we structure and choose who's on the board of directors. But it is, I always look at those situations as, sure, your concerns are valid, but are they realistic? So, so those situations, I'm always like, yeah, the worst case scenario is that we could end up with like a total tyranny of like, misogynistic, racist assholes on the board of directors that are just out to annihilate anybody who is non, mainstream, cis, het, white, whatever, and make it completely inhospitable to anybody who falls outside of any of those boundaries. But I really don't think we're going to see that. And in fact, I think going forward, we're going to see a more and more progressive board of directors developing, because it's going to be our generation that are going to be aging into this role. I'm in my 40s. People in the SCA think I'm still a 15-year-old kid, but I am not. I am now a fully realized, this is my final form adult. You should be terrified, right? No, but I think there's a lot of people in my generation and then the following successive generations now that are in their 20s and 30s that are coming through the SCA and are going to become the next board of directors. And we're going to find a lot more kind of a progressive and liberal, I'm going to just say it, because that's the way society is trending in general. And I think that that's going to be reflected in how the SCA goes forward. So, but I think there's also going to be a mix of ideology, because there always is. There's always going to be people that fall right of center and left of center and in the center, and all these things are going to come together, and you're going to get a committee that moves at a glacial pace and doesn't do, does one thing right, but does this not as good, and people are going to be mad about it, or people be mad about the thing that was done right because it changes something. I've been in the SCA for almost 30 years. Literally, this is the same conversation that we've been having for the last 30 freaking years, if not longer. And I'm sure it's been longer than that. So anytime somebody changes something or a policy gets added or, something is altered ever so slightly, the SCA is just going to have a little freak out about it. And then it'll calm back down when they realize it's not going to, totally ruin their game. Everything's going to be actually okay, because it's literally just going to continue doing the thing that it does. So, not to dismiss those concerns, but I also do think that they're not realistic.
Yeah, I want to think back 56 years ago after the first tournament happens at Berkeley, and like a week later they're having dinner. They're like, I don't like how we did that. Let's change that. And that conversation started then, folks.
It for sure did. It for sure did. I mean, like I live in a kingdom where like the original party still comes to events, and you still see people that were at that first. In fact, there's people that are at that first event that are still incredibly active in my community, my immediate community. And so, yeah, and the stories that I've been hearing from my elders going all the way back to day one absolutely bear that out, which is, it's human nature to not want, who moved my cheese, like that kind of thing. Like, no, I want my cheese there. And then somebody moves it over here a little bit. And then we all get very upset about it. And we have to talk about it and yell and, but then eventually it calms down and everybody's like, oh, okay, the cheese is actually okay right there. We always talk about changing. Yeah, in the West Kingdom, we always talk about changing light bulbs. We have a light bulb that we installed May 1st, 1966, and we're not changing it. That's not entirely accurate, but the West Kingdom in general is very averse to any sort of major change. But major change has to happen. It has to. If we want the organization to continue and be here in another 50 years, then we got to figure out how to make it relevant so people feel protected and safe and heard, and things are accessible. For varying definitions of accessible, physically accessible, maybe socially accessible. Like we have to talk about those things, and we are. And then that's another kind of deviation off of this, but a really interesting experience for me is seeing how in my time in the SCA, how different it is today than it was 4 years ago, 5 years ago, let alone 20 years ago. We have a very progressive board who are moving at lightning speed compared to what it used to be like to change these policies, to make people feel safer and encourage more participation and allow for a wider range of experiences to be valid in our space. We're a big tent. Everybody can fit under it. Like, that's what we are. And so, 20 years ago when we were complaining about rapier in the West Kingdom being a thing, it was incredibly controversial. It moved at a glacial pace, but eventually the West caught up. We had white scarves. Now we've got the MODs, and we are still here. People are still playing. Nobody really seems to be like, well, I'm flipping tables because rapier, I'm gone. There was a lot of talk like that, but it didn't, it didn't happen. But now we're seeing things happen much, much, much faster. And I'm really, I'm heartened by that. I think it's going to continue.
Yeah. I can think back. So when I played 10 years ago, when the board met quarterly, we had 4 board meetings a year, and that was it. Now they're meeting like every other week. It seems like, and actually they're getting more work done. And
right.
But it's because guess what, folks? We've got social media. They have Zoom. They finally realized that. I think.
My gosh.
The pandemic forced them to do that, but cool. I'll take it. But also because of those newer members, you have. If you look at the median age of the board now, I'm sure it has dropped.
Oh, it has
significantly in the last few years.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're seeing a lot more people in their 30s and 40s aging into the bod, which historically speaking, it's been a higher age. Now we do talk about the fact that the SCA used to be a much younger demographic than it is now. When I joined, people were the grown-ups were in their 30s, basically. That was the grown-ups. And now they're in their 50s and 60s, and they're still playing. Right. So we have to also figure out how to bring in young blood, how to encourage young blood to participate, feel supported, all of these things that, again, social media is sort of the avenue for getting people hooked. And I am excited about that. As much as I feel very kind of conflicted about my particular experience as Kingdom social media officer, I am excited about the reopening of the SCA, and we're going to start to see more technology being incorporated, like I mentioned, TikTok, Instagram, whatever the next thing down the pipe is. Whatever it is, I don't know. If you're like 12 years old, message me and tell me what that thing is, because I want to know. I have no idea. But so we're going to start seeing that, outreach to those communities happening. And I'm really psyched about it. I'm like pretty excited to, go and start filming little TikTok videos at events. That's going to be fun.
No, I completely agree. And as long as we look at that and use them correctly, my biggest concern is always is if we're going to try to have TikTok replace Facebook, and folks, that's not going to do that. You can't. No, they're not the same thing. So we find these new platforms, we find these new tools, and we use them as such. Yeah. We move forward. Yeah. All right, so I'm going to do a little business, and then I've got a couple final thoughts here. So speaking of social media and things coming up on Kal-bardr's Corner, good segue. No. So next week, I won't be joined next Sunday. So next Sunday, I will be out of town. So Baron Logan has agreed to take over my show and take over Wellbeing. He will be joining Duchess Nisa for consort conversations on how to choose a consort. So tune in for that. I enjoy Nisa. That's been a great conversation. I was sort of reticent about when I started consort conversations, or when she started consort conversations, to be a part of it, because I was like, I have nothing to say about this, but I really enjoyed talking with her about that and seeing the conversation goes on with that. So I'm looking forward to catching it after it airs, but and looking forward to seeing Logan back on the air again. He's taken some time off. So it'll be good to see him back on camera. So tune in for that next Sunday. And of course, always like, comment, subscribe, push all the buttons down there for this show and all the other things here in Kal-bardr's Corner. If you want to support us further, look us up on Patreon, patreon.com/KK Productions. throw some money our way, help us keep the lights on, get some cool rewards while you're at it. Actually, oh, there you go. And last but not least, check us out on Redbubble. So just search KK Productions. I just released a Pride sticker. This corner has no closets. So check that out. It's got a rainbow in it. Feel free to grab a couple. Any proceeds that come from that, I will be donating to local LGBTQ plus organizations. So I'm not making any money off those stickers. That was not my intention. So anything coming out of that, it will likely only be a couple dollars anyways, but I'll make sure that gets funneled off to some local organizations. So that's that. Tuli, anything coming up social media wise for you, or anything you know about? Anything you want to plug?
We're on a break right now between so we wanted to take about a month off because Helga and I were both feeling a little fried at the end of it. Doing a weekly show for a year, and to the extent that we were doing it, it was really, really exhausting. So we're taking a break. It's lasting a little bit longer than we expected. We're still trying to kind of get the energy up to be able to talk about how things are going to change going forward. I don't think any of us really wants to see the show end, but we are also kind of like, we can't do it the way we did it before. So
especially as the SEA opens back up, it's going to change a lot of these shows. And it's something I'm looking at now. I know it's something Logan's looked at. When I talked to Lash about it, we're all sort of having those conversations now. There is something I will promote on your behalf. I know you and Helga did an interview recently for Griffin Eye News.
Yes, we did.
So there's 2 episodes of that. Yeah, I think it's 3. Yeah. So check that out. That's Avakal's news channel. So Griffin Eye News on Facebook. It's a super good interview. I caught the first part. I haven't caught the second part yet. But
I haven't watched it yet. But I just remember we were there for like 4 hours just talking, and they were like, "We're going to have to split this up." Also, I want to mention too. I am doing the Sisters interview this week, the Branch of Laurels form of the Sisters Network. So I'm going to be doing that with the Shoxy, and I am excited. And I'm really actually curious to know what pictures they picked, because I told them just to go hog wild, find weird stuff. I don't care. I'll talk about all of it. But as you can see, I have kind of no filters.
You were very honest and full of sass, and that's what I appreciate about you, Julia.
It's my sassy.
All right, folks. With all that, let's see. Hold on. Yep, I've got an empty cup, so we'll call it a good day. How are you at?
I'm down to, you can approach me now.
Okay, good. We're good. I'll call that a win then.
Yeah.
All right, folks. We appreciate you all for joining us. Thank you for the comments we've had out there. I hope you all enjoyed this. Make sure, again, like, follow, comment, subscribe. We will catch you all next week. This has been Tulia and Cal in Kal-bardr's Corner. Have a good day, everybody.